But it was also like hearing from the customers and just experiencing their world from that perspective of being in the kitchen and cooking while they were, going out and like walking with their children or taking someone to a swim class. Like all of these things actually happened while I was cooking.
Oh, wow.
And it was really, again, it was like, wow, that's the value for them. So it really helped me hone in on our value proposition and what people were really getting. Yes, you're getting a meal. But I recently had a customer tell me like it's so much more than the food.
Hi, I'm Professor Bhatia, a professor of entrepreneurship here at NYU Stern, and I'm so pleased to have Erica Tuggle, the founder of Cookonnect, here with me today.
Yes,
so
thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
We've actually known each other for 3 or 4 years now.
Exactly.
You've been an active participant, or your company has as well, in our class, the New York City Entrepreneurship Lab. So you've worked with a number of students. And through that process, it's just been really fun to learn about your company and watch it grow.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I wonder, maybe we should start first by just talking about like, what is Cookonnect?
Yeah, sure.
And what do you guys do?
Yeah, so Cookonnect is essentially a platform that makes personal cooking more accessible. And what that means essentially is we are connecting busy individuals, typically families, with in-home personal cooks who are cooks in your neighborhood. So they're working in restaurants, they're working in professional kitchens, but they're also working now in homes through us to provide weekday meal prep services. And those services are typically provided on a subscription. So we're a subscription-based connection point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I can get my own private chef.
Yes, exactly.
That sounds like a pretty expensive proposition.
Yeah, and that's the accessible piece. So our goal and our mission is really, like, we want to create healthier families, but we also want to create economic opportunity for the chefs on our platform. And the way that we bring more and more people into that picture is by creating something that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. So it's actually, our model is focused on creating the greatest value at a price that a lot of people can afford. So we benchmark to things like Uber Eats, even like Grubhub. So if you're paying, $20-something a meal on those platforms, that's about what you're going to be paying on ours as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I swear my Uber Eats bill has just gone up and up and up. So the idea of having someone that's making food that I know all the ingredients for in my home.
Exactly.
Okay, that sounds
so
much
it's
more
fresh. It's much more healthy for you when you think about the ingredients and the things that you want in your food. And it's also really convenient.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so where are you based and where are people able to get this product?
Yeah, so that's actually, everybody's always like, is it here? And I'm like, no. So we are in Atlanta now. That's where we launched the model, which is awesome. It's been a great market for us to learn a ton in. But we do plan to start expanding next year, which is really exciting. But like I said, Atlanta's given us really everything we need from the consumer side and the culinary side to really figure out what this model should look like.
And like, what's the traction now? Like, who are your customers?
Yeah, so we really focus on busy families, and they love it. Like, it's honestly, like, the feedback we get is phenomenal because for them, they're managing their careers, they're managing kids' activities, and when you get to 6 or 7 or whatever dinner time is, it's like, oh my gosh, what are we eating? And how are we coming together as a family? Or when are we coming together as a family? And so we really create this really awesome, like, functional convenience, but then there's also this kind of emotional, like, oh my gosh, we actually get to have a family dinner. Which between, soccer practices, gymnastics, like tutoring, whatever it might be, work calls, conference calls, like it can be really hard for families. And so that's our main customer today. We definitely see opportunity beyond that because I always have people say, well, I don't have kids, but I could use this. Like, totally. We're all busy. None of us have time to eat the way we want to be eating. And unfortunately, convenient foods tend to be unhealthy. And so we definitely see beyond that market, there's a lot more in terms of who can be using this service.
Yeah, no, I could see that. The what's for dinner problem in our house is like a serious issue. It's always like, and we laugh because it was like the thing we grew up with, that like our parents are always like, oh, what are you guys going to eat tonight? And we're like, I don't know. Why are you asking us this question every day?
Exactly.
Now
we're like, I don't want to have to deal with it. Yeah. it is one of those things that like, especially like if you're on, we follow a lot of like the mom like influencers, and the conversation around it is like incredible. It is literally like people are like, my marriage is like tested every night because of dinner, like what's for dinner conversation. Like my kids, they ask me one more time, like I'm gonna blow up. Like it's just very interesting, the emotion and the all that goes into that question of what's for dinner. And so we're excited because we can take a lot of that away.
Okay. So it'd be really great to hear a bit about your founder story and like what you did before you started Cookonnect.
Yeah. I think I have a little non-traditional entry into entrepreneurship. I started really in corporate America. So when I left and graduated from NYU, I went to American Express. Then I went to Harvard Business School, and I was like, I want to be an entrepreneur. Like I want to learn more about total business and how to shape, businesses and companies. And I took all the classes, but I really didn't have a problem to solve. And so I left there and I went into food because food was always really special to me. And I just love it. And so I went to General Mills, learned more about the food business and the food ecosystem. And then I went to Atlanta with Coca-Cola. And so I spent about 8 years at Coke. And while I was there, a lot of like Cookonnect kind of started coming to me. And so one, I had my children there. So I had my 2 kids, and my life just got a lot more complex. And so things like, mealtime started to take a back seat while I was trying to manage my career. And then now this new, little family my husband and I were nurturing and growing. And so that was kind of one. Then I was leading the Coca-Cola and food strategy at Coke. Which gave me really like a front seat to consumers and their challenges with mealtime and food. And it was all so similar and all not solved well, right? So all of these customers were talking about how they want to eat well, but it's so difficult. Convenient foods really still aren't healthy no matter what we try to do. There are always sacrifices. But cooking is something that's really hard for people from a time perspective, sometimes skill. So anyway, I found that problem while I was dealing with it myself and while I was hearing about it from consumers while I was working. And so I ended up learning from other moms about this idea of like, hey, we bring someone in to help us. And it was I always call it like they were like hacking dinner time. Like it was very
dinner hack,
casual, very informal. And I saw a huge opportunity to create a formal kind of experience that didn't feel formal, but made it easier because there were systems in place to make this sort of thing happen, to find someone, which is usually the biggest challenge, and then to manage like the recipes and the relationship and ensure you're getting high quality and specific service that's customized for your family. So that's kind of how I came to it. And then actually I was the first cook on the platform. So clearly from my background, I'm not a professional chef by any means. And I always tell the chefs on our platform, like when I was doing it, it was way worse than what we have today. But I was able to get into kitchens. I was able to get people to purchase, services from me through really text messages to mom groups. And it was like the best experience for me to learn what the model should be.
You say that it's like kind of, so we got a lot of questions based on your founder story. First of all, it's amazing to hear that like you identified a problem as an industry expert, which is fantastic. But then you also empathize with it as a customer, as a user of this thing, 100%. Which is like the ultimate goal for most founders is to have that kind of triangulating and to be focused on a problem rather than like, oh, what's the solution? So like amazing. But now I'm curious, like you put yourself in the shoes of the chef, like you were the first MVP of this model. Like what did you learn by being like such a part of it?
A lot of things. One, it is really hard work. And so in that kind of came in 2 angles. So it was really hard work, like being in the homes and like on your feet, making these meals. It took me like 5+ hours, right, to get through a full meal prep. But it also like cued to me like, gosh, working in the restaurants, people say it's hard, but it's even harder. Like the conditions are harder, the speed is harder, the pressure is higher, like all of those things.
You got the family like in the next room. You're in the small kitchen. You don't know where anything is.
It's totally different in the kitchen and in the home versus in a restaurant. And so that was a really interesting juxtaposition for me because it helped me understand the value for that side of our marketplace of this opportunity to come into a home and to have a family that you're servicing, a little less pressure, a little bit more creativity, ownership, like all of those things, flexibility. The list goes on. And so that was a really interesting part of that experience. But it was also like hearing from the customers and just experiencing their world from that perspective of being in the kitchen and cooking while they were, going out and like walking with their children or taking someone to a swim class. Like all of these things actually happened while I was cooking.
Oh, wow.
And it was really, again, it was like, wow, that's the value for them. So it really helped me hone in on our value proposition and what people were really getting. Yes, you're getting a meal. But I recently had a customer tell me like it's so much more than the food, which is like huge, right? Because it is the time you get back with the people that you love. It is the less stress. I just ordered actually, because I use our service right before I came out here to New York, actually, so my kids would have a good meal.
Oh, that's smart.
And so I just ordered, and I was texting my husband who was also traveling, and I was like, I just feel like a nicer mom. And I hate to say that, but like I'm just less, my fuse is not as sure. Like you take some of it away, and it helps so much, and it becomes so much more than the food. So anyway, that was a lot of what I learned. I also learned a little bit about where there was confusion in the model, like where it's a new model for people, so where they might need more explanation or more help in understanding what we're doing by the questions we would get when we went to the homes. But yeah, that was a lot.
Wow, that's fantastic. You also mentioned as part of this founder story going to two very good business schools. That Harvard Business School, it's okay, and then the NYU Stern School of Business, in the reverse order. But you went to business school. What did business school actually prepare you for in regards to entrepreneurship?
It's honestly, some of it's the leadership piece, but it's also the networks. So I've had such wonderful classmates and friends who have been not only just supportive, like emotionally and like encouraging, but also supportive with their networks. When you go to business school, obviously everybody's interested in business, but people go off and some people become investors and some people just work in the industry that you're interested in. Some people own restaurants. And so I've had just an incredible network to tap into of people who have made connections for me or given me advice and that sort of thing, which I've really appreciated. And then I would say it is like the things that you learn are more, it's less the like, how do I do accounting, which you learn too. But it's more like, how do I think about team management? Like, what is the leader I want to be? Because when you're an entrepreneur, that's where it really is all on you, which I love. But it's also a big responsibility for you to step into who you are and who you want to be. Versus sometimes in an organization, you can feel shaped or you can feel, like directed in a certain way. But it's really like, no, this is your company and this is your team that you're going to be building. What do you want that to look like? And I think some of the foundations set in B School set some of that for me.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, you're defining your culture.
Yeah, exactly.
You're setting the tone of the organization.
Yep.
That's really interesting. And so let's take the flip side. What did business school not prepare you for?
Oh gosh. The incredible uncertainty of just about everything. There's a lot that you just don't, that will happen that you don't expect and you can't plan for. It is one of the most, like I tell people, there's like such a roller coaster, and that roller coaster is like, kind of the operations of the business, stuff happens, whatever. But it's also, as a founder, I find it to be very emotional. So it's also like, you feel like you're on top of the world, like, maybe you closed around, maybe you had, a great month, in terms of revenue growth, whatever. And then you can feel like you're at like literally the bottom of like, I don't know, as low as you can go because something, happened that feels really big and important. And so that roller coaster, how to manage through the roller coaster, I don't think I was prepared for that at all, really.
Wow.
But it's been like creating community around, like with other founders who have been there before, who have, more experience in this than me. That's been probably where I've gotten the best education in that regard.
Wow. So, I mean, that's really interesting because some of my research looking at founders, one of the things I found is that founders feel lonely. There's this sense of like, oh my God, I'm the only one doing this thing. And your cadence is so different than everybody else, right? You're an accountant and it's like, oh, we're in tax season. Everybody's in tax season. But you're on your own right now. Like you're raising money. Maybe nobody else is raising money.
Right.
And then the other thing you said is this uncertainty and the ambiguity and the roller coaster. It's like, in the classroom, I'm constantly trying to figure out like, okay, well, these are known things. ChatGPT is doing the work here. It's all predictive and planning. How do we prepare students for all that other stuff, right? And so actually, the class that we're in, the New York City Entrepreneurship Lab, like they're on that roller coaster ride with you. And I got to say that you've been one of the best leaders that we've had in the group. So I can see that like that leadership experience has really paid off.
Thank you.
So yeah, good for me to hear too that like, okay, this is what the real founder experience is.
It's funny. I was thinking about the course because I was like, that is probably the best way you can get exposed or understand at least what that might look like for you if you decide to take that route is by just being in it. Because I really don't know how else you get that preparation.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I want to shift gears here and give you a multiple choice question.
Oh, fun. Okay.
Yeah. just to make it a little fun here. And so my question is, what's the hardest part about being a founder?
Okay.
Wearing multiple hats, raising money, shipping your product, or imposter syndrome?
Oh, those are really good. I would probably go with imposter syndrome.
Oh, tell us more.
Because I think it impacts in everything else. And I deal with it like every day. When you are an entrepreneur, like we just talked about, there's a lot of uncertainty, but there's also, because you're wearing so many hats, there are a lot of areas that you don't know, you've never worked in before. So like I mentioned earlier, we're hiring a software engineer right now. I have not a technical bone in my body, right? So I've gotten mentorship and guidance from people on how to do that, but it's very uncomfortable for me to make sure that I'm hiring the right talent and I'm having to rely on people in a big way that I haven't had to before. And imposter syndrome can make that really hard and make you doubt even the things that you know you do well. So like, I know that I'm good at like understanding people and understanding, evaluating people and that sort of thing as an individual, as a contributor, like all of those things to a team. I may not get the tech piece, but I get a lot of other things. And so counteracting or dealing with that imposter syndrome opens up really all of those other things, makes all those things easier. So wearing the multiple hats makes it easier. Fundraising, which is like, you have to go in there with confidence and really unwavering belief in your idea. Because you will hear no more than you will hear yes. And all of those things, again, I think get easier, if slightly easier, if you're able to combat that imposter syndrome, which is hard, really hard. Like I said, I think literally every day I have a moment on something where
wow, that's really interesting. I like how you're saying it's like a base. It's like a foundation. Having that authentic or confidence in your entrepreneurial self can allow you then to execute on all those others. So what have you done? What strategies, like, do you look yourself in the mirror and say, I can do this? Like, what's your hack?
I always talk a lot about support systems because and it was like one of the first things I did when I was making the decision to leave Coca-Cola and to pursue, what became Cookonnect, was to like lean into my support system. So like I called my parents and I shared with them what I was doing, and I called my siblings and, my husband, of course. And the same still applies as like I try to remind myself of who I am and what I can do, is with those support systems, the people who know me best, I've been able to get reminded that like, no, like you can do this. Like think about when you did XYZ, or think about where you were a month ago or 6 months ago. And they're the people that I find have the best perspective that sometimes I lose because I'm so, focused on like everything, but so focused and not thinking about the bigger picture. And that's the bigger picture of who I am and what I've done. And so, that's really been probably the best thing for me, is having strong support around me. That's
great. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? They're the people that know you, that give you that broad perspective. Wow. Okay. I'm going to ask another question in this ballpark, but it's more like, what is success for you as you're pursuing this, as you're pursuing your career?
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. As like, it is a part of your career. Like this is a very, as we were just talking about, like for me, it feels like a very natural progression from where I was and what I was doing. And I see it as like a natural piece of me growing as a leader and a business owner and that sort of thing. But success is a few things, honestly. Like I think about success in terms of what I want to be able to do, the impact I want to be able to have through Cookonnect, I mentioned we really focus on like building healthier families. That's both emotionally, and we talked about like coming together, connecting over food, and like physically through having better food on the table, and that economic opportunity with the chefs. And so as we think about like the impact we can make with Cookonnect, that is paramount in terms of like what is success and how are we tracking in the impact we're making in those areas. In addition to that, it's of course building a company that has not only the impact, but also the value creation that I believe we can have. And that's an interesting one because, you know, startups are wrought with failure. It's just kind of a part of it. It's part of the process, but then it can also be where you end and you move on to something else. But even in that, I know that there is, you know, where we've created more value today than we did yesterday, than the year before. And so that's really my goal. And I'll feel successful as long as we're increasing and continuing to build on the value creation that we have. So yeah, those are a few of the things. I will also say, and I didn't mention this before, but with my two kids, like being an entrepreneur and what they see and learn from that is really important to me too. So that's also an element of how I think about this. Is like it is absolutely something that drives me professionally, and I love it. Yeah. But it's also the benefit that I see them getting and what they're learning, what they're interested in now, the questions they ask. That makes me really excited and feeling like, okay, if you know, we can come out of this with like me feeling like I had impact through the company, me seeing that we've created value for a market, and then like my family has come out stronger too. Like that's like what could be better, you know?
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, very comprehensive to think both like professionally and personally.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you have to. They're increasingly intertwined when you're an entrepreneur, I feel like.
Absolutely. So I get a sense of where you're going in terms of like your broad, like how broadly how you define success. But I'd be curious a little more specifically when you think about Cookonnect, like what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, great question. Because it is much more than connecting people with chefs. It really is about like how do we create healthier families and how do we create economic opportunity. Those two things on both sides of our marketplace are really important, and that's where we just have, that's our impact, and that's the value that we create.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about this economic opportunity, because I know, having known you for a few years, I feel like a few years back you told me that one of the surprises that you had was how much this model is actually really important to the supply side of the equation and not the moms. I mean, you came in as a customer from the mom side, but you learned so much about the chefs.
That's
so
exactly
tell us about the chefs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we target, and we've learned this, but now we target chefs who are working as chefs or cooks in professional kitchens like restaurants. And what we've learned is that their experience can be really hard. Usually they're not making a lot of money. They're also usually working multiple jobs because they're not making enough in that one job, or they're looking for other hours. And that environment can be really stressful, can be, you know, high in terms of inflexibility. And obviously if they're looking to make more money, they need some flexibility. And the hours can be really hard, weekends, nights, as you can imagine. So we learned a lot about them early on, and I think cooking gave me more empathy for them as well, cooking myself. But what that really highlighted for me was, gosh, what can we do if we can give them this opportunity to make more per hour, to have an environment that allows them to have a flexible and really owned opportunity, and then ultimately to potentially build out like this client base on our platform so that they can become a personal chef in a more consistent capacity. And that's where the economic opportunity really blossoms in addition to what we're doing today.
Yeah, oh, that's great. So when you're thinking about your customer, you're really thinking about the two-sided market of those that are looking for cooks and those that are looking to have that economic opportunity.
Exactly.
So how do you navigate that? Like how do you navigate like the space that you're in? And like you're visiting New York Tech Week or going to a pitch and like you're not building an AI company. So it's like, you know, like the conversation's all about AI, and now it's like, oh, well, we're talking about cooks and families and chefs. So it's like, how do you navigate that space?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because you're right. It's like, you know where the conversation is right now, and I'm like, and it isn't, to your point. Like, this is not what people necessarily care about. A couple of things. You find what is in your story that people do care about. And so for us, it's health, you know, nutrition, you know, even as we think like longer term, like it's aging population, it's those things that people care about right now, and that we care about. But what you also do, so there are like two ways, like you can do that, and you can also just find the right space, like people that do care about what you're doing. But it's interesting when you go to events like New York Tech Week, like I've tried to be really deliberate about, okay, I'm going to look for the consumer events. I'm going to look for not just my stage in terms of where the company is, but also as close as I can get to specifically who we are, what we're doing, what we're trying to do. Because that's just going to be a more successful experience for me. But it's really, it's interesting. You've got to kind of, I do think you come at it from both ways. Yeah, you got to kind of recognize and read the room and then go from there.
That's great. So one of the questions that I always like to end on is to get a sense from you as a founder, like what would you recommend to somebody that's out there watching you and saying like, I want to create something, I want to build something. What's your advice to them?
I always tell people it's really hard. So just know that going in. Like it is definitely the hardest thing I've had to do professionally, like everything, really, honestly. And then to support yourself in that, like going in eyes wide open, that it is going to be very difficult. Make sure you have the right communities around you and you're engaged in the right communities. And that has always been really important to me, even beyond what I'm doing right now. But and I think now even more so, particularly being a female founder, a Black female founder, like those things where you start to move away from what the traditional founder, VC-backed founder looks like. Having community of people who have done it before and can encourage you and guide you, having community of people who understand that experience, those are the communities I try to wrap myself in and around. And I always tell people if they're starting out, like make sure you build that for yourself. It was actually one of the main reasons I wanted to join Techstars and be accepted into that when I first applied, because I knew I didn't have any community within the startup world. And so for me, it was just a base of like, let me start building that. And then as I learned more about like what I needed to do to be successful and to be inspired and to be supported, it was really about finding those right communities.
Wow. All right. So community is the key, because it's just gonna, you say wrap itself around you and like support you along the way.
Yeah, because it's like I said, it is hard.
Okay. Well, so I mean, I got to ask you more about this. So you're saying your first response is it's hard.
Yeah.
That's not really encouraging. And that's fine. So then do you recommend not to do it?
No, I don't actually.
Okay.
Like we can do hard things, right? Like it's hard, but like one of the reasons I decided to leave Coke, which was actually like, it was great. Like I led Coke. I loved my job. I loved the people I was working with. I felt like I was growing and doing well there. But I felt like there was even more that I could do. I felt like I could be challenged more intellectually. I felt like there were so many things that I just felt like I wasn't yet getting to. And entrepreneurship presented those things for me. And it's true. And so while it's really hard, it's also like if you're interested in like your professional and personal development, like it's one of the best things I think you can do. If you are someone who also like loves to work with other people to build things and to create, like that's also one of, even though it's really hard to do that, it's also one of the most exciting and inspiring and I don't know, just interesting things I could think to do. So absolutely hard. And I tell people that because I don't think anybody really expects it to be as hard as it is, even though, I mean, you're doing something remarkable when you're building a company. No matter how it's funded or how big or small it is, it's really remarkable. And so I just like to remind people of that. But we can do hard things, and it's very, like, I found it to be so worth it, honestly.
Okay. All right. That's I can take that. That's pretty balanced. And then actually, I need to ask one other question.
Sure.
So your journey, and among the people that I've interviewed thus far, you're coming out of a career that was, in, as you say, food and in this industry. So do you recommend, like, what's your thoughts on that? Like, is it worth like getting some of that career experience in an industry and then starting up? Or do you partly think, oh, maybe I could have started sooner?
That's a really good question. I mean, I might be biased, but having the industry experience, I think has been really helpful to me in a few ways. I talk about community and really networks, like having access to people who I've built relationships with, but can now help me think about different things like distribution strategies for Cookonnect, or partnerships and that sort of thing who have been in that space even longer than I have, hugely helpful. It's amazing. Like I've been really just like, I had no idea like all the ways that my network could help me. But people who have worked with me in food, I'm like, oh, you know this investor, or you know this supplier, or whatever it might be. I would also say, honestly, like to build a company, you have to have a vision and also have some thoughts on how you might get there. And then, of course, you're kind of experimenting and trying things out along the way. But you have to have some sort of vision. And I do feel like my experience has helped me to shape my vision because I've seen kind of how different things in the industry work. I've experienced what works, what doesn't work. And so I do think there's a lot of value in that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, this has been a pleasure. Always great to catch up with you.
Yes, thank you.
We'll have to do this again.
Yes.
Thanks for joining me, and we'll talk more soon.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.